Martha, he said, slicing through the chocolate frosting like it was nothing. We should end this tonight. The candlelight shimmered across his face, calm, steady, while the words hit me like a stone dropped in still water. I blinked, thinking maybe he was joking, the way we used to tease each other after too much wine. But his eyes didn't carry a trace of humor. It was our anniversary, 35 years. The table was set, the good china out, the roast still warm in the oven. I had tied a ribbon around his gift with trembling hands that morning, a silver watch engraved with "Forever Yours." "And what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Our marriage," he said quietly. "It's time." The way he said time, soft, almost kind, made it worse. He reached for his coffee, took a sip, and wouldn't look at me. I waited for a reason, a fight, a name, something, but all he gave me was silence. Outside, the wind pressed against the kitchen windows, and the house, our house, felt suddenly foreign, like I didn't belong in it anymore. That night, I sat alone at the table, staring at the untouched cake, wondering how a man could walk away from a life we built, and what secret could make him do it on the one night meant to celebrate us. Still remember the smell of that kitchen coffee percolating in the old steel pot, the faint sweetness of cinnamon rolls cooling on the counter, and sunlight pouring through the gingham curtains. I'd sewn myself back when our children were small. That was life before everything cracked. Simple, predictable, good. My husband, Richard, liked his routines. Every morning at 7:30 sharp, he'd sit at the table, unfold the Daily Gazette, and ask me about the weather even though the forecast was printed right in front of him. It was his way of starting the day with my voice. He'd wink, kiss my cheek, and head out to his auto shop down on Maple Street. Folks trusted him there. Honest Rick, they called him. I had my own rhythm too. Church choir on Wednesdays, a little bookkeeping at the library on Fridays, and Sunday dinners that could feed half the neighborhood. Our daughter, Emily, lived 2 towns over with her boys, and our son, Luke, called every other day just to hear Mom's voice. As he'd say, we weren't fancy people, but we were the kind who kept promises, the quiet kind of happy. That my sister Linda had always been the opposite of quiet. Younger by 6 years, loud, quick to speak her mind, and even quicker to leave when things didn't suit her. She'd drift in and out of my life like summer storms, sudden, loud, and then gone before you'd grabbed an umbrella. That spring, she came back again, suitcase in hand, mascara smudged, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said her 3rd marriage was on pause, which was Linda's polite way of saying it had ended in disaster. I remember hugging her at the doorway, feeling that familiar mix of love and worry. Family was family. No matter how many times she crashed, I always opened my door. Richard didn't protest, at least not out loud. He'd always been courteous to her, though I could sense the tension he tried to hide behind polite smiles. Just until she finds her feet, I promised him. He nodded, but his jaw tightened the way it did when he wanted to say something and thought better of it. At first, it was fine. Linda filled the house with her energy, rearranging furniture, playing old records, baking pies that left the kitchen sticky but alive. She told funny stories at dinner, the kind that made even Richard chuckle. For a while, I believed her presence was a blessing, a reminder that family could heal itself, if given enough warmth. But small things began to shift. Richard started staying later at the shop. Linda would linger at the table after he left, sighing dramatically about how men just don't appreciate what women do for them. She'd praise Richard in the same breath. "You're lucky, Martha. Most men aren't like him." I laughed it off. That was her way, flattery, mixed with complaint. But I noticed how she watched him when he walked in, how she leaned a little too close when handing him his coffee. It wasn't seduction, not exactly. It was something subtler, something colder. One night, as I folded laundry, I heard her voice from the porch, low and hushed. "She worries too much. Richard, you shouldn't let her hold you back." Her words drifted through the screen door like smoke. I froze, half expecting to hear his reply, but all I caught was his sigh, heavy and uncertain. I told myself I'd misheard. After all, we'd shared decades of trust. A marriage doesn't crumble over a whisper, does it? Linda had a way of making herself indispensable. She started helping at the shop, just doing the books, she said. I thought she was doing us a favor, saving me the drive. Richard agreed, saying she was sharp with numbers, and I smiled, because that's what wives do when they want to believe everything is fine. But inside, something uneasy began to hum, a quiet, constant tension, like a radio left on low. One Sunday afternoon, During lunch, Linda joked that Richard deserved a medal for putting up with a perfectionist like me. Everyone laughed, even Richard, but I felt my cheeks burn. It was a harmless comment, yet it lodged somewhere deep, like a splinter. That night, I told Richard I didn't like how she talked to him sometimes. He smiled, weary. She's just lonely, Martha, don't read into it. Maybe he was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that loneliness wasn't the only thing driving her. Weeks turned into months. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. Her perfume lingered in the hallway. Her laughter filled the quiet spaces we used to share. And slowly, I began to disappear in my own home. That was the spring. Everything began to change, though I didn't know it yet. If I'd looked closer, I might have seen the cracks spreading beneath the surface. But love makes you blind, sweetheart, especially when you've spent a lifetime believing family could never be the knife that cuts you. It started with the small things. It always does. A missed dinner, a closed door, a tone in his voice that felt guarded. By summer, Richard and I hardly had breakfast together anymore. He'd grab his coffee to go, claiming things were piling up at the shop. I didn't question it. After 35 years, you learn when to give a man space. But I couldn't help noticing that the space he wanted never seemed to include me anymore. Linda, on the other hand, was everywhere. She'd taken over his bookkeeping to help him organize better, she said. Sometimes, I'd call the shop just to ask if he wanted lunch, and it would be Linda who picked up. Her voice would drop into that exaggerated whisper she used whenever she wanted to sound important. Rick's out on an errand. Martha, he's so busy lately. You should see the stress he's under. I used to thank her. I used to think she was helping us. One Friday afternoon, I stopped by the shop myself, unannounced, with a thermos of lemonade and a basket of sandwiches. The bell above the door jingled, the air heavy with motor oil and old jazz from the radio. Linda was behind the counter, laughing at something on Richard's phone. He looked up, startled, and the laughter vanished from her face like a light being switched off. "Oh, Martha, we didn't hear you come in," she said, voice bright but eyes sharp. Richard fumbled with his glasses. "Hey, hun, you didn't need to drive all the way down here." "I was in the neighborhood," I lied. My hands tightened around the handle of the basket. Linda reached for the sandwiches first. "Oh, how sweet. You still make those roast beef ones." "My favorite," she said, "my favorite." Not his dot. It was such a small detail, but it clung to me the entire drive home. I kept asking myself why it bothered me so much. After all, she was my sister. But it did, because that moment didn't feel like family. It felt like something else creeping in through the cracks. That night, Richard came home late. His shirt smelled faintly of her perfume, that expensive one she always wore, too floral for my taste. He said the scent must have rubbed off when she hugged him goodbye at the shop. I nodded, smiled, and went upstairs to cry into the pillow I'd stitched his initials onto. I wanted to believe him. I did believe him, or at least the part of me that was still trying to protect the life we'd built. But trust, once shaken, becomes something fragile, like old glass. It looks solid, but one wrong touch and it shatters. A week later, Linda began making little remarks at dinner, subtle, barbed, wrapped in laughter. "Martha, you worry too much. Let the man breathe. Rick tells me you've been getting forgetful lately. Maybe you just need a hobby." Each line landed like a pin. She'd say it with that grin, the one that made everyone else laugh, and I'd be the only one sitting silent, bleeding from invisible wounds. I tried talking to Richard about it. "Do you hear what she says sometimes?" I asked one evening while we washed dishes together. He sighed. "She doesn't mean anything by it. You two are just different. That's all. Different." That word stayed with me all night. I began noticing how often he defended her, how quickly he dismissed my feelings when they involved her. I started writing small notes to myself, not because I wanted proof, but because I needed to remember what normal felt like. June 18th. He laughed at her joke again. June 23rd, she called him Ricky in front of me. June 25th, he didn't kiss me goodnight. It sounds foolish now, doesn't it? A grown woman keeping a record of her own heartbreak. But when the truth starts slipping through your fingers, sometimes all you can do is hold on to the evidence of your confusion. The real crack came one Sunday after church. I was setting the table when Linda leaned over the counter, her voice dripping sympathy. "You've had a good life, sis, but maybe Rick just needs a little more freedom now. You know, men your age, they get restless." I froze, the silverware clinking against the dish. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She smiled slow, deliberate. "Nothing. really, just saying, you shouldn't hold him too tight. He deserves to breathe. That word again, breathe. The same one she'd used before. When Richard came home that night, I asked him directly, did Linda say something to you about me? He frowned. Why would she? Martha, you're being paranoid. Paranoid, that's how they make you feel when you start to see the truth. Crazy, overreacting, too emotional. For weeks after that, I lived in a kind of quiet panic. Every look between them felt coded. Every whisper in the hallway sounded like a secret. But the hardest part wasn't what they said, it was what he stopped saying. He no longer told me about his day. No more goodnight kisses. No small talk over coffee. The man who once couldn't sleep unless my hand was resting on his chest, now slept facing the wall. I didn't recognize my own life anymore. And yet, when Linda packed her bags one afternoon, saying she'd overstayed her welcome, I felt a strange relief. She hugged me at the door, perfume choking the air, and whispered, "You'll thank me one day." I watched her drive away, gravel kicking up behind her old Buick. For the first time in months, the house felt still, but peace didn't follow. Because sometimes, sweetheart, the damage doesn't leave when the person does. It lingers, waiting to be revealed. When Linda left, I thought the storm had passed. I was wrong. If anything, her absence made the silence louder. The house felt hollow, not peaceful, just emptied of something I couldn't name. The tension between Richard and me didn't ease. It shifted, becoming a distance you could almost measure in miles. He was polite, kind even, but it was a careful kind of kindness, like a man tending to a stranger's garden, gentle but detached. Sometimes, I'd wake in the middle of the night to find his side of the bed cold. I'd hear the creak of floorboards downstairs and see a sliver of light under the kitchen door. He said he couldn't sleep, too much on his mind. I wanted to believe him, but I'd seen the way he stared at his phone lately, the way he'd step outside to take calls that used to happen right in front of me. One evening, I made his favorite dinner, meatloaf and mashed potatoes with extra gravy, and set the table with candles. Just like I used to when we were young. I thought maybe we could find our way back. Maybe love could still sound like laughter between bites of warm bread. He came home late, distracted, apologetic. "Long day at the shop," he said, loosening his tie. I smiled, pretending not to notice that his shirt smelled faintly of Linda's perfume again. She'd been gone for nearly 2 months. But that scent, sweet gardenia and powder, lingered like a ghost between us. We ate in near silence. When I reached for his hand, he hesitated before letting me hold it. The moment felt small, but something inside me broke quietly. Later that week, the phone rang while he was out in the garage. I almost didn't answer. We'd been getting a lot of wrong numbers lately, but the voice on the other end froze me in place. "Hi, this is Sheila from the accounting office," the woman said. "Just calling to confirm the change in access for the shop's records. Linda Harper's name is still listed as primary contact. Is that correct?" Linda Harper, my sister's name. I swallowed hard. "No," I said, steadying my voice. "She doesn't work there anymore." The woman hesitated. "Oh, that's odd. The last updates came from her email just last week. Mr. Harper approved it himself." I hung up slowly. My hands were shaking so hard, I nearly dropped the receiver. That night, when Richard came home, I asked him calmly, "Are you still in touch with Linda?" He looked caught off guard. "Why would I be? She's still handling the shop's accounts. Someone called today." He rubbed his temple. "Oh, that. I just hadn't had time to switch things over. She helped me for months. I didn't see the harm in letting her finish the quarter." There it was again, that tone of quiet dismissal, like I was a child asking silly questions. "Richard," I said, forcing my voice not to shake, "she's not harmless. She's manipulative." He sighed. "You're letting old resentment cloud your judgment. She's your sister, for heaven's sake." I wanted to scream, but instead, I just whispered, "And you're my husband." He didn't reply. Days passed, and little things began confirming what I'd feared. I'd find his phone turned face down on the table. He'd smile at messages he didn't show me. Once, I saw Linda's name flashed across his caller ID. He swiped it away so fast you'd think the phone had burned him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I got up, wrapped myself in a shawl, and went to his study, the room he called his quiet space. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and old books. On his desk sat a stack of invoices, a few unpaid bills, and one letter, folded neatly, with my sister's handwriting on the envelope. I knew that handwriting was like my own heartbeat. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The first line felt like ice in my chest. Rick, I hope you've found some peace since I left. You did the right thing. Martha will understand eventually. Sometimes letting go is the kindest thing you can do for someone who's holding you back. The rest was worse. A blend of flattery and poison. She wrote about how strong he was, how selfless, how he deserved more. It wasn't romantic, it was psychological, the kind of manipulation that sounds like love but tastes like venom. I read it twice before I sat down, hands pressed to my face. I wasn't angry, not yet, just hollow. When Richard came downstairs that morning, he found the letter lying open beside his coffee cup. He froze. Martha, he said softly, you shouldn't have read that. I shouldn't have had to, I replied. He exhaled, long and heavy, then sat across from me. Linda was just trying to help. She thinks you've changed, that you've been unhappy for years, but too proud to admit it. I stared at him, and you believed her. He didn't answer. His silence told me everything. That's when I realized he didn't need to have an affair to betray me. He'd already given her something deeper, his trust. I stood up slowly. You know, Richard, I said, voice trembling but clear. I always thought the cruelest thing a person could do was leave you, but I was wrong. It's making you doubt yourself while you're still standing right beside them. He looked away, ashamed but unmoved. That day, I packed a small bag and drove to my daughter Emily's house. I didn't say why, just told her I needed a little break. She hugged me and made tea, not asking questions. God bless her for that. 3 days later, he called. His voice was quiet. Martha, he said, I think we should make this official. Official? The divorce? I remember gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white. On our anniversary, Richard, you choose that night to tell me it's over. He hesitated. It's what Linda said you'd want. And there it was. The knife, finally pulled out where I could see it. My sister didn't steal my husband's body. She stole his mind. That night, as I sat alone in Emily's guest room, I realized betrayal doesn't always come with slammed doors or shouting matches. Sometimes, it comes quietly through whispers, half-truths, and people who say they're helping. Linda had planted a story, and he'd watered it until it bloomed into doubt. I cried until morning, not for losing him, but for losing the version of him that used to believe in me. Asterisk, grief has a sound. You know, it isn't always the wailing kind you see in movies. Sometimes, it's just the hum of a refrigerator in the middle of the night, or the tick of a clock in a house that no longer feels like yours. That first week after Richard's call, I didn't sleep much. Emily tried to keep me busy, folding laundry, making breakfast, asking small questions she already knew the answers to. I appreciated her gentleness. She never pried. She just let me sit in silence when I needed to. It's strange how quickly a lifetime can become a memory. One day, you're someone's wife. The next, you're a woman sitting at her daughter's kitchen table, stirring sugar into tea that doesn't taste right. I didn't call Richard. He didn't call again either. That was his way of saying it was final. After 2 weeks, I drove back home. The house looked smaller than I remembered. My flowers had wilted. The mailbox was stuffed. On the kitchen table lay a single envelope with my name written in his careful handwriting. Martha, I'm sorry it had to end this way. I didn't want to hurt you, but I think we both deserve a chance to be happy again. I'll make sure you're taken care of financially. Please don't hate me. Richard. I folded the letter, placed it back on the table, and just sat there for a long time. The anger didn't come right away. What came first was numbness, a heavy kind that settles behind your ribs and makes breathing feel like work. But anger has a way of finding its way through cracks in the quiet. A few days later, I found it in the way his toothbrush was still by the sink, in the smell of his cologne clinging to the hallway, in the photograph of us from our 25th anniversary still hanging by the stairs. I stood there, looking at that photo for what felt like an hour, until my reflection blurred behind it. I whispered, you don't get to take my story from me, Richard, not you, and not her. That's when I decided I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to chase answers from people who'd already chosen lies, but I also wasn't going to disappear quietly. A week later, I drove to my sister's house. She lived in a small cottage just outside town. White shutters, neat little porch, the kind of place people built when they wanted to look innocent. She opened the door wearing that same smug half-smile, her hair curled like she was expecting company. Martha, what a surprise, she said, voice sugar-sweet. Come in, come in. I stepped inside but didn't sit down. The air smelled like her perfume, that same gardenia scent that had haunted me for months. You spoke to Richard, I said, cutting straight to it. She blinked, feigning confusion. Of course I did. We're family. You told him I was unhappy, that I wanted to be free. She tilted her head. Wasn't that true? You've been complaining about feeling lonely for years. My chest tightened. Linda, I confided in you as a sister. You twisted my pain into poison. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, a flash of guilt, maybe, or satisfaction. I couldn't tell which. You're being dramatic, she said softly. He made his own choices. Yes, I said, but you handed him the map to my destruction. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked in her living room. Steady and cruel. You always thought you were better than me, she said finally, voice low. Perfect husband, perfect kids, perfect life. Maybe I just wanted you to feel what it's like to lose control for once. There it was, the truth, ugly and small. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just looked at her and said, you got what you wanted, Linda. But let me tell you, peace doesn't grow in the soil of someone else's pain. I turned and walked out. She didn't call after me. The divorce papers arrived a month later, clean, efficient, final. I signed them quietly, my hand steady this time. When people in town asked what happened, I didn't tell them the details. I just said, life changes, sweetheart. Sometimes the vows break before the voices do. I sold the house that fall and moved into a smaller one by the edge of town, a yellow cottage with a garden and enough quiet to hear myself think. At first, the silence scared me, but then, slowly, it started to heal me. I planted roses, the same kind Richard used to bring home on Fridays. They bloomed that next spring, crimson and soft, and I remember thinking how strange it was that something could still grow after so much loss. One morning, I found an envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a short note. You were right. She lied to both of us. I'm sorry it wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting. I read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't write back. Some things don't need a reply, just a prayer that the person who wronged you finds enough guilt to start their own healing. When I tell this story now, people sometimes ask, did you ever forgive them? And I say, sweetheart, forgiveness isn't a gift you give the guilty. It's the lock you turn so your own heart can walk free. Because one day, you wake up and realize you survived, and that's enough. In small towns, sweetheart, truth doesn't travel fast, but it never stays buried either. It moves like wind through cornfields, invisible, whispering, relentless. For months after the divorce, I kept to myself. I'd go to church, smile politely, bake for the Sunday fundraiser, and then come home to my quiet cottage. I didn't gossip. I didn't correct the rumors. People can say what they please. Life teaches you that explanations rarely change minds, but the truth is, it has its own strange timing. It began one morning at the farmer's market. I was picking peaches when I heard two women whispering near the bread stall. Did you hear about Rick Harper's shop? No. What happened? Audit found discrepancies. His sister-in-law was handling the books, something about forged signatures and missing funds. I froze, one hand on a peach that suddenly felt too heavy. When I turned around, they stopped talking. Small towns have their own choreography of guilt. By afternoon, everyone knew. Linda's bookkeeping help had been more than just manipulation. She'd been moving money, covering small debts with Richard's accounts, leaving him tangled in her chaos. The kind of trouble that doesn't send you to jail, but stains your reputation enough to make people whisper when you walk by. It wasn't revenge, I felt. Not really. It was something sadder, quieter. The kind of sorrow that comes when you realize even justice feels hollow if it costs that much love. A few weeks later, Richard came to see me. I was trimming the rose bushes when his truck pulled up the gravel drive. He looked older, not just tired, but worn from the inside out. Martha, he said, stepping out slowly, you look well. Gardening does that, I said, brushing the soil from my gloves. He nodded, eyes scanning the yard like he was afraid to look directly at me. I wanted to say, I didn't know what she was doing. I swear I didn't. I stayed quiet. He took a deep breath. She told me you'd changed, that you resented me. I believed her because it was easier than facing how much I'd changed. His voice broke on that last word, and for a moment I saw the man I'd once married, not the one who left me, but the one who used to bring me daisies from the roadside just because. I'm sorry, he said finally. I lost more than I realized. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the emptiness that comes when pride eats everything it touches. Richard, I said softly, some losses are lessons, and some lessons come too late to fix the loss. He nodded. eyes glistening. I heard you planted roses again. I did, I said. They grow best when you tend them quietly. He smiled faintly, then turned back to his truck. You always did know how to make things grow. When he drove away, I didn't feel anger, just peace, the kind that comes from knowing you no longer need answers. As for Linda, she moved away not long after the audit. Some said she went to Florida. Others said she remarried. I never checked. But one day, a letter arrived. No return address, no apology, just a single line written in that same neat handwriting. You got your piece. I hope it was worth mine. I folded it once, placed it in the same drawer as Richard's note, and never opened it again. That's the thing about truth, sweetheart. It doesn't shout. It just waits for time to do its work. And time always does. In church, people started greeting me differently, with softer eyes, gentler smiles. No one asked questions, but they knew. That's the unspoken kindness of small-town America. We hurt each other quietly, and we heal each other the same way. By the end of that year, I'd joined the choir again. My voice wasn't what it used to be, but it didn't matter. Singing among women who'd lived their own storms, I realized how universal heartbreak is. We all lose someone, somehow, but it's what we build from the pieces that defines who we become. Sometimes, I still pass the old auto shop on Maple Street. It's under new management now, with a fresh coat of paint and a young couple running it. But if you look closely at the back wall, there's still a faded sign that reads, Harper's Auto Care. I don't feel bitterness when I see it, just gratitude for what was, for what ended, and for what grew after. Because, in the end, life isn't about holding on to people who break your heart. It's about tending to your own soil until something new blooms in its place. Asterisk. The hardest part about starting over at 70 isn't the loneliness, it's the quiet. When the world goes still, you start to hear the echoes, your own regrets, your old laughter, the what-ifs that hide in the corners of your mind. For a while, that quite terrified me. I'd turn on the radio just to fill the air, hum along to songs from the 60s, pretend the silence wasn't sitting beside me. But slowly, that quiet became something else. A teacher. I learned to sit with my own thoughts without needing to fix them. I learned that forgiveness isn't a single act, it's 1,000 small choices you make every morning when you wake up and decide not to let bitterness own you. Some days, I'd walk down to the park and watch young couples on the benches, holding hands, arguing softly, laughing over coffee, and I'd smile, not out of envy, but understanding. They didn't know yet that love is fragile because it's real. You can't hold it without leaving fingerprints. My daughter Emily visited often. She'd bring her boys, and the house would fill with the sounds of life again. Little feet running down the hallway, laughter bouncing off the walls. One afternoon, she found me sitting on the porch swing with a cup of tea and asked, Mom, do you ever think about him? I smiled at the question. Sometimes, I said, but not with pain. He was part of my story, not the whole book. She nodded, maybe too young to understand that kind of peace, but one day she will. A few months later, I got a call from the church asking if I'd share a short reflection at the women's luncheon. Something about resilience. I almost said no. But then I thought about how many women sit quietly in pews, carrying stories they never tell. So that Sunday, I stood behind the little wooden podium in the fellowship hall, heart steady, voice calm, and told them about the power of staying soft in a world that tries to harden you. I didn't use names. I didn't mention betrayal. I just said, sometimes, the people we love lose their way, and sometimes, we do too. But healing doesn't come from proving them wrong. It comes from living right, even when no one's watching. When I finished, the room was silent. Then, one by one, women came up to hug me, some with tears, some with smiles. That's when I realized the truth. Pain shared becomes light, not gone, but lighter. That spring, my garden bloomed early. The roses came first, bold and crimson, just like they used to be. But right beside them, something unexpected grew. White lilies. I hadn't planted them. Maybe the wind carried the seeds, or maybe God thought I needed a reminder that beauty can find its way back into broken soil. I cut a few stems and placed them in a vase on my kitchen table. The sun poured through the window, catching the petals just right. And for the first time in a long while, I whispered, thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just to life itself, for not giving up on me when I almost gave up on it. Sometimes, I still dream of that anniversary night. The candles, the untouched cake, the sound of the knife against the plate. But in the dream, I'm no longer the woman crying at the table. I'm the one getting up, washing the dishes, and stepping outside to watch the stars, because that's what healing looks like, sweetheart. Not erasing what happened, but reclaiming the part of you that survived it. Now, when I sit on my porch in the evenings, I often see neighbors walking their dogs or couples holding hands. They wave, I wave back, and the world feels whole again, not because it's perfect, but because I finally am. And every once in a while, I catch the faintest scent of gardenia drifting through the breeze. I don't flinch anymore. I just smile and say quietly, I hope you found your peace, too. Linda, because forgiveness isn't about freeing them, it's about freeing yourself. You know, sweetheart, people always think the hardest part of betrayal is the moment it happens, but it's not. It's the mornings after, when you wake up and the world looks exactly the same, but you're not the same person living in it anymore. That's when the real healing begins. I used to think my story ended the night my husband asked for a divorce, but looking back now, that was just the middle, the part where everything I'd built was stripped away so I could see what truly mattered. If you've ever had your heart broken by someone you trusted, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, I want you to know something. You can survive it without becoming hard. You can lose everything and still choose kindness. That's the kind of strength the world doesn't teach you. It's the kind you earn by walking through fire and coming out softer, not colder. Sometimes I sit here, on this same porch, watching the sun set over the lilac trees, and I think about how life gives us the same test again and again, until we learn to love ourselves enough to walk away with grace. So tonight, if someone's silence is hurting you, or if a family member's words have cut deeper than they should have, don't waste your heart trying to fix what refuses to be honest. Just tend to your own garden, darling. Let your peace be the proof that you were never the problem. And if you've listened this far, maybe it's because you've lived something like this yourself. So tell me, sweetheart, would you have done what I did? Would you have stayed quiet and let time reveal the truth? Or would you have fought to expose it sooner? I'd love to hear your heart in the comments, because stories like these, they don't just belong to me. They belong to every woman who's ever loved, lost, and learned to bloom again.